So today we're going to dive into something called digital equity. But really, what we're talking about is a very human, very modern struggle. It's the fight to simply be seen. In a world that's basically run on data, what happens when you just don't show up in the numbers? Well, let's get into it.
I want to start with this quote because it's pretty powerful and honestly a little chilling. If you're not in the data, you don't count. What does that even mean? And in our hyper-connected world, why should that phrase be a massive red flag for all of us? Let's unpack that.
All right, first things first. When we talk about digital equity, it's so easy to think it's just about who has an internet plan and who doesn't. But you know what? The reality goes way, way deeper than that. This definition really gets to the heart of it. See, true digital equity isn't just about flipping a switch and giving someone an internet connection. It's more like a three-legged stool. You need the actual tools, like a working computer. You need the skills to use them, and you need the support to navigate a system that can feel, let's be honest, pretty overwhelming. It's got to be the whole package.
And that right there, that's the real goal. Having a Wi-Fi signal, that's just the starting line. The real prize is empowerment. It's the ability to actually go after an education, to find a better job, to connect with your community. It's all about turning that access into real-world opportunity.
But what happens when that goal isn't met? Well, the gap that opens up, what we call the digital divide, it isn't just some abstract statistic. It has very real, very serious consequences that affect people's everyday lives. Let's take a look.
Okay, so in education, it creates something called the homework gap. Just imagine for a second you're a student, and you can't do your research online or turn in an assignment from home, all because you don't have a reliable internet connection. This puts so many kids at a huge disadvantage before they've even really started.
And in the economy, the impact is just massive. It completely cuts people off from remote work, which we all know is becoming more and more common. It limits the job search itself. And for a small business, not having a solid online presence can be a death sentence, making it impossible to compete with the big guys.
It even hits our health and our ability to be active citizens. I mean, think about it. Things like telehealth appointments, applying for government benefits, or even just keeping up with what's happening in your own town. All of that becomes incredibly difficult if you're stuck on the wrong side of that digital divide.
And this is where the problem gets amplified by technology itself. Take AI, for example. A few years back, it was shown that a Google search for unprofessional hairstyles mostly returned images of Black women. Now, the AI didn't just invent that bias out of thin air. It learned it from all the data we fed it, which, of course, reflected existing prejudice in society. It's a perfect example of how the digital world doesn't just mirror our inequalities, it can actually make them bigger.
And all of this, it brings us right back to the core of the problem. That idea we started with, what it really means to become invisible in the data.
Here's the crazy paradox in all this. The automated systems we're building to manage things like healthcare and social benefits, they're trained on data. But the very people who need those services the most are often the least represented in that data. They're effectively invisible to the systems that were designed to help them.
So, who are we talking about when we say digitally invisible? Well, it's a much wider group of people than you might think. We're talking about the elderly, people with disabilities, low-income families, and folks in rural areas, for sure. But it also includes anyone who, for some very understandable reasons, might really distrust the system and just choose not to engage. All of them leave behind a much smaller data trail.
And what this creates is a really dangerous, vicious cycle. It starts with low visibility. People are just missing from the datasets. This leads to biased systems, because the AI is being trained on incomplete, skewed information. Those flawed systems then lead to poor outcomes, like maybe wrongly denying someone benefits. And that, of course, deepens distrust, making people even less likely to engage with the system. And then the cycle just repeats, pushing them further and further to the margins.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty grim, I know, but it's not hopeless. The good news is there are actually clear, actionable ways to fix this. We can build digital bridges and forge a real path forward.
Two big strategies really stand out. On one side, you've got something called collective impact. That's the big picture approach, getting everyone, governments, nonprofits, private companies, to pull in the same direction. Then, on the other side, you have inclusive design, which is more of a ground-level philosophy for how we actually build these systems in the first place.
Collective impact actually works because it forces everyone onto the same page. I mean, imagine trying to build a house with 5 different sets of blueprints. It'd be total chaos, right? This model makes sure everyone shares one vision, uses the same ruler to measure what success looks like, and coordinates all their work. With a central team keeping everyone talking, all those separate efforts become one powerful, unified force for change.
And inclusive design, well, that's like the practical rulebook for building better systems. It's about actively looking for who's missing from your data. It means treating an empty field, no data, as a giant red flag, not a neutral zero. And this is so crucial. It's about designing solutions with the people they're meant to serve, not just for them. And always keeping non-digital options like paper forms or in-person help on the table.
So why does all of this really matter? I mean, why is this so important? Because this isn't just some abstract conversation about technology. This is about the kind of society we all want to build for the future.
When you boil it all down, it comes to this one simple, powerful truth. Digital equity is not a tech issue. It's a human rights issue. It's about making sure that every single person has a fair shot at an education, at finding work, at getting healthcare, and having a voice in our democracy. This is just what fairness has to look like in the 21st century.
And this quote right here is the perfect yardstick. Anytime we build a new app or a new algorithm or some new smart system, this is the one question we absolutely have to ask. Does it help the most vulnerable, or does it end up pushing them even further into the shadows?
So ultimately, that brings us to the final question, the one we all really need to think about. As our world becomes more and more digital, what does it truly mean to leave no one behind?